I started out this thing by trying to say, well, let's keep it simple here, okay? And I say this, quote, so it's clear as can be. Basic rationale behind charges that Putin interfered with the 2016 U.S. election to help Trump, that basic rationale rests, of course, on the assumption that Moscow preferred Trump to Hillary Clinton. Whoa, what does the House Intelligence Committee say about that? It says that there's no evidence to support, quote, Putin's supposed preference for candidate Trump, period, end quote. Now, let me explain that, okay? You could say, oh, well, look, Trump said he wanted to have a decent relationship with the Russians. Yeah, right. Well, Putin's, he's been around for a while. He knows what's possible within our body politic, within the context of a domineering defense industry. He knows what's possible. Besides that, when this legend became current, started to be built, I objected by saying, look, I've been watching the Soviet and Russian leadership for 50 years now. Okay, I think I know a little bit about how the Russians look at these things. I was chief of the Soviet foreign policy branch of CIA. Now, what I think is this. Here's Putin sitting around with his advisors, right? And he's watching the campaign. And he's saying, my God, that Trump is really something. He's not only unpredictable, but he brags about being unpredictable, and he lashes out at any slight, real or perceived, that, this is going to be a lot of fun to have him across the ocean with his fingers on the nuclear codes. Bring him on. Let's help him. Let's help him win. Give me a break. It doesn't parse at all. And but it doesn't take much to persuade the poorly educated American people who think they get the real deal from the New York Times. That once was the case, like 40 years ago. But my God, it's no longer the case. So the American people have been duped. And my informal survey says that 80% of them believe that the Russians did interfere in our election.
Listeners are saying to me on Twitter, it's difficult for Ray to know for certain, but would Ray be suspicious as to the death of the former staffer Seth Rich with respect to the hacking of the DNC servers? Seth Rich death, it's not sat well with a lot of people, Ray, for a long time. What do you think?
It sits as well with me as the so-called suicide of David Kelly.
Right.
In other words, it stinks to high heaven. Now, what do we know? Well, we know this is supposed to have been a robbery, but the robbers forgot to take anything from Seth Rich.
Yeah.
We know that he worked in the Democratic National Committee and that he had access to these kinds of things. We know that he had been a fan of Bernie Sanders. Whoa. So picture this. He gets to the Democratic National Committee. He reads some of these emails released by WikiLeaks, and he sees some of the other internal emails from the DNC. He said, my God, this is awful. They really did steal the nomination from my friend Bernie. So he's got incentive, right? Besides that, we have Cy Hirsch, he didn't know he's being recorded, but he talks about the notion, well, he doesn't talk about the notion, he talks about the fact that he's been told that Seth Rich was in contact with several emails with WikiLeaks. So, Julian Assange, head of WikiLeaks, what has he said? Well, when this came onto the front burner, he was being interviewed by a Dutch journalist on TV. And Julian said, this shows the dangers that whistleblowers risk when they decide to reveal the truth. And the Dutch guy said, are you saying that he's your source? And Assange said, we never reveal our sources, but we are offering a $20,000 reward for anyone who can figure out, who can tell us who killed Seth Rich. Well, hello. Now, what's besides all that? Well, we have a movement. I don't call it an organization. It's called it's called Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence. Annie Machon, who I mentioned before, as a charter member. So is Craig Murray, Ambassador Craig Murray, UK ambassador,
That's right.
formerly of Uzbekistan, but he didn't like receiving the proceeds of torture sessions. He objected to the Foreign Office, and the Foreign Office says, "Well, don't be squeamish about that. As long as British people are not doing it, if the Americans do, you report it." And he said, "I'm out of here." So Craig Murray is a former winner. Now, why do I mention all that? Well, 2 years ago, when we honored John Kiriakou with the annual award from the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence, we asked Craig to come to Washington and MC the ceremonies, which he did. We were at American University. He did a great job. He's a great ad-libber. And as we left, we said, "We're going out for a couple of drinks now, Craig. Will you come with us?" Now, for the first time in history, and I know Craig pretty well by now, Craig said, "No, I'm not going to join you for drinks." And all of a sudden, he disappeared behind a little hillock, behind the place where we had the ceremony at American University. He didn't show up for the rest of the time. Now, there was a mystery to that. But 2 weeks later, we learned he had met with someone connected with the leak that was gotten to Julian Assange with respect to the DNC emails. Now, he's been real careful. He said it wasn't the source, but it was somebody who was familiar with what was going on, and that all he could say is that he could guarantee without any obfuscation that the Russians were not responsible for giving WikiLeaks this information. He knows who did it, and it wasn't the Russians. Okay, so you have Craig Murray saying that.
Good afternoon. I'm still reporting on the Clintons. Ex-British Ambassador Craig Murray has just admitted to being the source of the DNC email leaks that were put out by WikiLeaks. In an exclusive story running in this morning's Daily Mail, a British newspaper, Murray says that he flew to Washington and in a clandestine meeting in a wooded area near American University in northwest Washington, D.C., took physical possession of the email trove that came from disgusted whistleblowers inside the DNC who had legal access to the data. Although Murray declined to name names, he said that there were others, plural, inside the DNC who were involved. Many of those watching this situation closely now believe that one of those responsible for the leak was the DNC's Voter Expansion Data Director, 27-year-old Seth Rich. Rich would have had broad admin privileges covering all email traffic within the DNC. Rich was found shot in the back multiple times on July 10th, about a block from his home, 2 miles north of the U.S. Capitol building at 4:20 a.m., early on Sunday morning, after staying up all night at his job at the DNC. Julian Assange offered a $20,000 reward for info on who killed Rich and has insisted throughout that the DNC emails were not the result of a Russian hack. Assange has not been heard from since his last tweet on November 6th, the Sunday before Election Day. "Hey at Hillary Clinton, you have until Monday to drop out or we will destroy you completely."
Welcome to part 2 of our interview with NSA whistleblower William Binney. If you know anything about William Binney, you know that he is probably the smartest guy who ever worked for the NSA and invented the greatest metadata gathering tool ever, known as ThinThread. He's also blown the whistle on corruption inside of the NSA, and he's a member of VIPS, Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, who debunked the WMD's lie that the government was feeding us. Well, he's here to debunk another big lie that the whole nation's been feeding us. Okay, now let's get back to the technical aspect of the alleged Russian hack of the DNC servers. You delineate, just like you said, that if someone did that, the packets would be out there, they would be reassembled at the other end, and the NSA would be able to show you that, where those packets ended up. That's what you're saying.
Yep. And if you look...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
But what you're saying is that they didn't do that, which means they don't have that evidence, which probably means that didn't happen, because if it did happen, they would have that evidence, correct?
That's correct. And if you looked at the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment, which is really done by selected analysts from NSA, CIA, and FBI, selected ones, not the general people doing the job. Okay, and they came out and they put out a little over a 13-page paper talking about they have high confidence it was the Russians that did it.
Yes.
Or that's their judgment, okay? Yes. They said their judgment, they have high confidence that the Russians did it. And then on the bottom of page 13 of that same report, it says, here's how you begin to understand the word judgment. Judgment is not intended to mean that we have evidence to prove something to be a fact. Okay? Yeah. So in essence, they've denied their entire previous report pages. They've made it say this is not necessarily factual. That's fundamentally what it said.
Yeah, yeah.
Then we had Guccifer 2, right? And this guy put out stuff that said it was a hack of the DNC, and they were alleging that the Russians did it. Well, and he posted the data, so that meant we had something to technically analyze. So we thought, okay, if this is a hack, let's go look at it and see what we can figure out about that data. So we have the data, right? We have it was spread out over a 14-minute period, and it gave a certain amount of transmission at the front, a little bit at the back end. But it's all time-stamped, so that at the end of the files, the files are all time-stamped, and you could see the time-stamping, and therefore calculate the transfer rate over time, which meant that, and we got the rate we got was the highest rate we had was 49.1 megabytes per second, not bits, bytes per second. Now, we knew that was not, there wasn't any way that could go across the internet. You can't send that massive amount of data at that rate across the internet. It just won't go. So we've tried it. We have tried to do it. We put data out there and tried to take it across the Atlantic to different places in Europe, Amsterdam, Albania, Belgrade, and the UK. The fastest we got was 12 megabytes per second. That was between a data center in New Jersey and a data center in the UK. That was the fastest we could get. So, and in Albania and going further east, the capacity went down. So we had much less capability further east you went toward Russia. So we said that this, from testing, it wouldn't work. So the download rate, though, was a perfect match for a USB stick download from a device, from a computer, because that would fit right into that. So what we said, and the fact that NSA didn't say anything about it, we said this is a local download. Wherever local is, we couldn't even prove it was the DNC, but we found some other evidence that was even much more interesting. We found data from Guccifer 2 that was put out in dated the 1st of September of 2016, and if you looked at that and ignored the everything except the minute, the hour, minute, the minute, second, and millisecond of the timestamps. Those two dates from 5 July and 1 September merge into one continuous stream of data. So the random probability of that happens is almost infinitesimal. So it meant that Guccifer 2 was in fact playing games with the data and playing games with us. So all this allegation that it was a hack or even alleged to be a hack is just false from the beginning. This guy's playing with us. He's kind of falsifying evidence and falsifying inputs to us. So trying to make an argument to support the idea that the Trump administration was involved with the Russians. Well, from our point of view, it's absolutely false.
All this, the IG, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, served up these very damaging emails, which show that the FBI and the Department of Justice, together with the CIA and to a lesser extent NSA, were out, number one, to do Trump's campaign in, and number two, to make sure that he couldn't function once he became president. Those are documents, okay? That's the real deal on the reality of the deep state. And I guess I got into this by mentioning Seth Rich, and I'll just say once again. So, what percentage would you give the FBI of coming clean and doing a creditable job on Seth Rich? Where is his computer? Oh, the FBI has his computer. Well, it's going to come out. I just hope that it comes out early enough so that people will be held accountable. Because what happens in this town is nobody is ever held accountable, whether it's for this or for torture or anything else. And so it can happen again.